So right here we have a quadratic equation, okay? And I know since it's quadratic, the maximum number of solutions I'm going to get is how many? 2. The maximum number of solutions is 2 because the highest degree is squared, right? Now, you see that there's not a number I can factor out all 3 terms, is there? And that all 3 terms don't have an x either, do they? What form is this? This is quadratic form. And we talked about if quadratic form is going to factor, it will factor into what? 2 binomials. So let's go ahead and write 2 binomials. Binomial 1, binomial 2, and it's equal to 0, right? Now Isabel looks like she's already done. So what do I put in the parentheses? An x in both of them because x times x is x squared, right? And now I need to write the factors of what? 32. My factors of 32 are 1 times 32. What else?
2 times 16.
2 times 16. What else?
8 times 4.
4 times 8. Anything else? Now, let's look at our factors. Can I do 32 minus 1 and get 12? Because remember, our factors have to multiply to be 32 and add to be 12, don't they? But now, if you look, 8 plus 4 will give me 12, won't it? So what should I put in my parentheses?
Plus 4 and plus 8.
Plus 4 and plus 8, right? And so now I'm not done, Avery. I factored it, but what haven't I done? I hadn't set each one equal to 0. So I've got to take x plus 4 and set it equal to 0, and I've got to take x plus 8 and set it equal to 0. So I'm going to write x plus 4 equals 0. And x plus 8 equals 0. So I set this whole term equal to 0, and I set this whole term equal to 0, right? Now what should I do? So solve them. Subtract 4 on both sides was correct, so x equals what? Negative 4. And I'll subtract 8 on both sides on this right one, and I get x equals what? So you have 2 solutions, don't you? If you were to graph both those solutions, okay, that means what you'd see is you'd see a graph where the graph touched the x-axis at negative 8 and at what?
Negative 4.
So it's going to touch the x-axis twice, right? All right, this problem is very similar to the ones we've been doing. Look at it and tell me what form it's in. Quadratic form. Now, this isn't just an expression. We don't just want to factor this, and I know that because it's set equal to what?
0.
And so that tells me they want me to solve it, right? This isn't just a quadratic expression, it's now a quadratic what? Equation. And the only way y'all know how to solve a quadratic equation is by what? Factoring. Now there's 3 other ways that we're going to learn, but this is the only one you know. Okay? So to solve a quadratic equation by factoring, you've got to factor it. Since this is in quadratic form, if it factors, it'll factor into 2 what? Binomials. So I go ahead and set it up like this. I go ahead and write the binomials. Now, what times what gives me x squared? X times x gives me x squared. What are my factors of 27, Peyton?
3.
Let's always start with what? 1 times 27, and then what? 2 doesn't go into it, but what'd you say 3 does? 3 times 9. Now, do one of these factors add up to give me negative 12? It does, but I'm going to have to make them both what? Yeah, negative 9 and negative 3 will give me negative 12, won't they? So I'm going to have to make them both negative. Negative 9 and negative 3, right? So now, let's just look, Avery, and see if we factored this correctly. Is negative 9 and negative 3 multiplied to give me positive 27? It does. Does negative 3 and negative 9 add up to be negative 12? They do. So I factored it correct. Now let's set each one equal to 0. So I've got x minus 9 equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. And I've got to solve each of those now, right? So I'm going to add 9 on both sides. And so what does x equal? 9. And I'm going to add 3 on both sides. And so what does x equal? 3. So if we were to graph this, okay, let's say we drew a coordinate plane. If we were to graph this, with our solutions being, what were they? X equals 9 and x equals 3. Is that what we said? With our solutions being 9 and 3, here's what we're saying. We're saying at 3, the graph is going to cross the x-axis right there. And at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's also going to cross. So the graph's going to look, we know that x squared provides us what type of graph? A parabola. So we know the graph will look something like this. Now I'm just giving you an estimate. That's not exactly. But you can go to the y equals in your calculator and put the equation. What was it? X squared minus 12x plus 27. If you go in your calculator and you enter this in for y equals, it should provide you a graph that looks real similar to this one. Now I told you there's 4 ways to solve a quadratic equation. Okay? Number 1 is what you're learning right now. What does it say? Factoring. Now, here are the benefits of factoring. Factoring is fast. Okay? Factoring is very fast. But just like anything, it's going to have its drawbacks. Okay? The main drawback, can you think of the bad thing of factoring? Yeah, they don't always factor. And if it doesn't factor, then you can't use it to solve. Okay? So we're going to put here, it doesn't always work. It doesn't always
Work.
If I'm writing it, what should you be doing?
Writing it.
Yeah. It doesn't always work. So when does factoring not work? Yeah, when the problem doesn't factor, then there's no way to solve it by factoring. Okay? Now, let me quickly talk to you about the other 3. The quadratic formula works every time, but it's slow. Complete the square works every time, and it's a little faster than quadratic formula. But the problem with it is, it's hard to remember how to do. Solving by graphing works every time, but you don't have your graphing calculator in your pocket when you're walking in Kroger. Right? So, solving by graphing is beautiful if you have a calculator. But the state test has a non-calculator portion, so you may not be able to use it, right? So each of these 4 methods does the same thing. They all solve a quadratic equation, and they all have their benefits and their downfalls. I like to always check to see if it'll factor first. If it doesn't, then I go to the quadratic formula. We're going to learn all 4 of them here in this month.